What if the most powerful message you ever speak is the one that puts you at risk? What happens when truth is spoken not to impress, but to confront? And how do you respond when you're given a chance to defend yourself, but choose something greater? Stephen stood before the council, surrounded by leaders, watched by those who had already formed their opinions. Accusations had been made. Tension filled the room. Every eye was fixed on him, waiting for his response. This was his moment to defend himself, to correct the lies, to protect his reputation. But instead, he chose a different path. He began to speak, not just about himself, but about something much bigger. He started with history, not as a lesson for information, but as a mirror for reflection. He spoke of Abraham, the beginning of a promise, a man called to step into the unknown, to trust without seeing the full picture, a journey marked not by certainty, but by obedience. Then he moved to Joseph, a man rejected by his own brothers, misunderstood, sold into hardship, yet still used for a greater purpose. What looked like failure became part of a larger plan. And then Moses, a leader raised up, yet rejected by the very people he was sent to help. A man who saw injustice, stepped forward, and was pushed away. Still, he was chosen to lead, to guide, to deliver. Stephen's words were not random. They were intentional. Each story pointed to a pattern of resistance, a pattern of misunderstanding, a pattern of rejecting what was sent to help. And as he spoke, the connection became clearer. This wasn't just about the past, it was about the present. He reminded them that their ancestors had often resisted what God was doing. They had turned away, they had ignored, they had opposed the very voices meant to guide them. And now, the same pattern was happening again. But this time it was closer, more direct, more personal. Stephen didn't soften the message. He didn't adjust it to make it more comfortable. He spoke with clarity, with conviction, with courage. He said that they were resisting once again, that they were refusing to see what was right in front of them, that they had become so focused on tradition and control that they missed the truth. These were not easy words. They challenged authority. They confronted pride. They exposed something deeper than surface-level disagreement. And in doing so, they created a moment of decision. Because truth, when spoken clearly, requires a response. It cannot simply be ignored. It either leads to reflection or resistance. The council listened, but not with openness, not with curiosity. Their reaction was intense. They were furious, not just because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. Sometimes the hardest truth to hear is the one that feels too close, too accurate, too personal. And instead of leading to change, it can trigger defensiveness, anger, rejection. But Stephen continued, not with fear, but with focus. He saw something beyond the room, a vision, a clarity that went deeper than the moment. And in that vision he found peace, because while everything around him was escalating, something within him remained steady. This is what makes his speech so powerful. It was not just words, it was a reflection of his foundation. He wasn't speaking to win. He wasn't speaking to escape. He was speaking because it was true. And that kind of truth carries weight, even when it is rejected, even when it creates tension, even when it leads to consequences. Stephen's speech invites us to think differently about how we respond in difficult moments. When we are given the opportunity to speak, what do we choose to say? Do we focus only on defending ourselves? Do we try to protect our image? Or do we speak with purpose, with clarity, with alignment to something greater than the situation? Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is not to protect ourselves, but to communicate truth. Not harshly, not carelessly, but honestly. Stephen's approach also shows the power of perspective. He didn't isolate the moment, he connected it to a larger story. He helped them see that what was happening wasn't new, it was part of a pattern. And when we recognize patterns, we gain understanding. We begin to see beyond the surface, beyond the immediate, into something deeper. This kind of perspective changes how we interpret situations. It moves us from reaction to reflection, from emotion to insight. And that shift is powerful, because it allows us to respond with intention rather than impulse. There is also something significant about the way Stephen spoke. He didn't rely on volume or force. He relied on truth. He walked through history, step by step, building a case not with accusation alone, but with evidence, with connection, with clarity. This reminds us that truth does not need to be rushed. It can be presented thoughtfully, carefully, in a way that invites understanding, even if it is not accepted. And that distinction matters, because our responsibility is not to control the outcome. It is to communicate with integrity, to speak what is right, to remain aligned with what we believe. The response of the council also reveals something important about resistance. When people are confronted with truth, especially truth that challenges their position, they often respond emotionally. Not because the message is unclear, but because it threatens something they are holding on to: power, control, identity. And when those things feel at risk, the reaction can be strong. But that does not mean the truth should be avoided. It means it should be handled with wisdom, with awareness, with courage. Stephen did not avoid the difficult parts. He addressed them directly, because sometimes growth requires confrontation. Not aggressive confrontation, but honest confrontation. The kind that brings clarity, the kind that reveals what needs to be seen, even if it is uncomfortable. This story also raises a deeper question. Are we willing to hear truth when it challenges us? Not just when it affirms us, not just when it aligns with what we already believe, but when it pushes us, when it exposes something we may not want to face. Because growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in awareness. In moments where we recognize something needs to change and choose to respond differently. Stephen's speech is not just about the people he addressed. It is about all of us. It is a reflection, a reminder, an invitation to examine our own patterns, our own responses, our own willingness to listen. Because it is easy to see the resistance in others, but more difficult to recognize it in ourselves. Where are we holding on to ideas without questioning them? Where are we resisting change because it feels uncomfortable? Where are we ignoring something that needs attention? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because awareness leads to transformation, and without awareness, patterns continue. Stephen also demonstrates something powerful about courage, not the kind that avoids consequences, but the kind that accepts them. Because he knew that what he was saying might not be received well. He understood the environment, the tension, the risk, and yet he spoke, not recklessly, but intentionally, because he valued truth more than comfort, more than safety, more than approval. And that level of courage is rare, but it is also impactful. Because it creates moments that cannot be ignored, moments that leave an impression, moments that challenge the status quo. And even if they are resisted in the moment, they can plant seeds, seeds of thought, of reflection, of future change. The story doesn't end with immediate acceptance, but that does not diminish its value, because not every truth is embraced right away. Some take time, some require distance, some need to be revisited later, and that is part of the process. Stephen's role was not to ensure acceptance. It was to speak clearly, to stand firmly, to remain aligned with what he believed, and in doing so, he fulfilled his purpose. This reminds us that our responsibility is not to control how others respond. It is to remain faithful to what we know is right, to speak with integrity, to act with consistency, to live in alignment with our values. And when we do that, we create impact, even if we don't see it immediately. Because truth has a way of staying, of resurfacing, of continuing to speak long after the moment has passed. Stephen's speech is a powerful example of this. It continues to resonate, to challenge, to inspire, because it was not just words, it was conviction, it was clarity, it was courage, and those elements never lose their value. As we reflect on this moment, we are invited to consider our own voice, how we use it, when we use it, why we use it. Are we speaking to protect ourselves or to express truth? Are we avoiding difficult conversations or stepping into them with wisdom? Are we willing to say what needs to be said, even when it is not easy? Because our voice carries influence. It shapes environments, it impacts others, and when used with intention, it can create change. Not always immediate, not always visible, but real, meaningful, lasting. Stephen stood in a place where everything was uncertain, but his message was clear. His purpose was defined. His response was intentional. And through that, he created a moment that continues to speak. A moment that reminds us of the power of truth, the importance of courage, and the value of staying aligned, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching this video. If this message challenged and inspired you, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.